Okay, looks like we're going. So it's time for another year of annual pesticide training. As you guys all know, I like to do this as a YouTube video. That way it can get to all of you. You all take the same test. It's all very standardized. The link to that test is right up here in the corner. Went the wrong way. It's right up here in the corner. You just hit that QR code if you happen to be on your phone. I'll make sure I leave a link to it in the description of the video when I throw it on YouTube. That way you guys will have it in multiple ways to be able to get to it. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, as with all my classes, I really do like to tie it into the Florida-friendly landscaping philosophy and point out what we're really talking about inside of that, since that is my main program. And I like to just demonstrate to you guys how we're doing that. So right now we're going to talk about managing yard pests responsibly. You could argue that this would also be attracting wildlife because we're going to talk about IPM a little bit, but for the purposes of this, we're just going to stick with the managing yard pests. All right, so pesticides are one of our four main pillars of the integrated pest management structure. And it's an important tool, but they should not be used as the initial response to any infestation. When we talk to clients, what I want you guys doing is asking about their gardening practices, asking what they're doing, how they're handling pests, how they're looking for pests. You need to go over scouting, talk about that. Talk about what they're doing to get out in their gardens and actually look for these things so that we can prevent problems in the future without having to go the chemical route as much as possible. Obviously, the chemical route is an important factor in it, and sometimes you just have to do that. You don't have a choice, but sometimes I want you guys to kind of go over their other gardening practices first. There are a lot of misconceptions about chemical use, but if they're applied appropriately, they really can be a game changer. And a lot of times people have tried a lot of other methods and they're just not getting any kind of pest control. And so the chemical can be a big boon for them once they get that going. So it's important for you guys to understand the chemicals a little bit better so that we can explain it to our clients a little bit better. All right, so IPM is of course one of our bigger functions here, and it starts with prevention, of course, and that prevention is scouting. So you're getting out in your gardens, you're looking at your leaves, you're looking at the underside of leaves, you're looking for any kind of damage so that you can head off problems before they actually become problems. From there, we're going to go to our cultural controls. How are we treating our plants? Our physical controls. What can we do to physically remove that insect or that weed or whatever it happens to be from the environment? And then we're going to talk about biological controls and how we can turn our gardens into an ecosystem and actually create the controls in there so that we don't have to be the ones physically controlling it. And then we'll get into chemical controls. Important things here. The reason that IPM is so important is we really do want to reduce those pesticide resistances. If you go out there and you throw a bunch of pesticide on every single time right off the bat before you do anything else, what you're going to get is a bunch of organisms that are resistant to it. And the IPM structure also gives you a long-lasting pest control and consistent pest control. And all of that is going to rely on you positively identifying the pest, because different chemicals react to different animals and different plants different ways. And so you need to make sure that you're giving the correct control to the correct pest. So positive idea of the pest is absolutely critical. Okay, so your cultural controls. This is what you're doing to physically eliminate some habitat potentially in your garden. So a cultural control would be, for instance, once you harvest everything, you remove it from the field and you're removing that environment and the habitat for the whatever species happens to be the bad thing that you're trying to get out. Using the correct plants. So we don't want to put, for instance, a crepe myrtle right up against a house where we're going to need to prune it every year. That's not sustainable. That's not good. It's not good for the plant. It's going to stress the plant. Stress plants attract insects. So make sure that we're putting things in the right place. We want to make sure that we're fertilizing, we're irrigating correctly. The reason we need to do that is, again, stress management. We want to make sure that these plants are growing appropriately and that they have the right amount of irrigation and not too much of either one of those, as they then become stressed on the other end of that spectrum. And stress plants, of course, attract pests. You can also use trap crops and banker plants. That's the two pictures that we have down here. The one on the left is, I believe it's squash interplanted with buckwheat. The buckwheat is used to attract the insects because it's a much more desirable plant for a lot of those insects. They can then treat that and then leave their main crop untouched, or they can harvest that off the field and eliminate a lot of pests that way. The picture on the right is called a banker plant. What they're doing is they're creating habitat inside that greenhouse. It looks like a tomato greenhouse, and they put papaya in there, probably for the lace bugs. They put them in there for that, to give them habitat, because if there's no place for those positive insects to live, then you're going to run into issues with they're going to leave because they don't have anywhere to live. So a banker plant provides that habitat. Okay, we have mechanical controls. Mechanical controls are the physical removal of any species that you don't want, whether that's pulling weeds. Of course, we're going to use deep cultivation. We don't want to do shallow cultivation, but whether that's pulling weeds or whether that's physically grabbing the insects and squishing them or taking caterpillars and throwing them into soapy water. Why soapy water? Because they can't crawl back out of the bucket that way. I get asked that question a lot, so now I just automatically say it. You can also use your hose to spray away some of the smaller insects like aphids. That's a good control in like milkweed. You again use your soapy water, put it in the bucket on the ground, bend the milkweed over it, and then spray the aphids off into the soapy water, and that kills them, gets them out of your garden, but doesn't have you put any kind of chemical on your milkweed, so your butterflies are okay. But those would all be mechanical controls. Biological controls is really merely just us using nature against itself. And so the picture on the right here, that's a parasitoid. That's a wasp that laid its eggs on that caterpillar. Those eggs are going to hatch and kill off that caterpillar. On the left here is the air potato beetle eating the air potato. So biological controls can come in any form. They can be predatory insects, parasitoids, bacteria, and fungi can also be biological controls depending on what they are. You could also use nematodes. There's a number of different biological controls that are out there in the world. It's important to know what they are and to talk to our customers or our clients and figure out what they're using or what they could be using in place of chemicals. And of course, now we're in the chemical controls, which is the main point of this entire presentation today. That's why I just kind of sort of gave you glancing blows of those past couple topics. So when do we want to control a pest species? Well, in the farming world, in the agronomic world, they have something called an economic injury level, and that's where they measure how much damage that insect will do to that crop before it becomes cost preventative before it costs the farmer less money to treat it than to not treat it. In our world, where we're talking about people's lawns and gardens and landscapes, we don't really have that luxury. It's kind of a whatever the client thinks is okay. So if they don't mind having a little bit more aphid on their plant, then that's fine. They don't have to get them off of there. If they don't want any insects, probably not sustainable, but that's their prerogative. And so we're here to sort of facilitate them trying to get what they want out of their gardens. But generally speaking, we should kind of keep that economic injury level model. And if it's going to cause you more damage to your landscape than it costs to fix it, so if you're going to have to go back and buy a bunch of new plants now because the insects have killed those plants, and now you have to go back and buy more versus buying the chemical in the first place to treat it, buying the chemical is probably the smarter choice. So we'll try to stay with that economic injury level model, even though that's not directly applicable to what we do. So there are 3 strategies for from stopping insects or pests. One is prevention. That's keeping it from being a problem. That's the people that are out in their gardens every day scouting, out in their landscapes every day scouting. It is much easier to remove a whole bunch of aphids when they are still in their egg form than it is to wait for them to hatch and then try to go back and circumvent them later. It's just so much easier to do it just off the cuff and off the beginning, and so the prevention is a good way to do that. Suppression is going to be what we're going to most likely be doing and most often be doing. The reason for that, keeping these animals in check is going to be a lot more practical than trying to eradicate them, which is of course the next one, which is complete eradication. The reason for that being, let's say I spend a bunch of time and money and effort and I kill all of the stink bugs on my property. Well, meanwhile, my neighbor didn't do anything. And so now my neighbor's problem is going to become my problem because now I have all the food for those animals, for those stink bugs. So eradication is really not, unless you're in a greenhouse situation, in a commercial greenhouse where they have the time and the effort and it behooves them to completely eradicate, chances are we're not going to be coaching people to eradicate. Suppression is going to be what we want. We want to keep them below that injury level that I talked about a little bit ago. All right, so why do pesticides fail? The biggest reason is that people don't know what they are treating. So they will see some sort of insect damage to their plant, and their cousin or their brother or their father or their mother or somebody will tell them, well, what you got to do is go down and get you some Spectricide and mix it at double strength and then spray it everywhere that you can see. Okay, well, we didn't know what insect or what pest was affecting that garden. So now we took a generalist approach that may work, it may work, but likely won't completely solve the problem. So we really do need to figure out what the problem is before we come up with a plan of action on how to fix it or how to correct it or how to eliminate it. Another thing that they do is they'll use the incorrect active ingredient. That comes from not knowing which pest it is. If you know which pest it is, then we can bump that against our IFAS documents and we can figure out what chemical works the best against that particular pest. All chemicals will affect them in one way or another, but not all chemicals are as effective as others. And so it's important that we get the right thing and apply it to the insect in question. Sometimes you're going to get the wrong dosage or the wrong application rate. That is purely from mixing, and that's not reading the label or not understanding the label. So you guys need to be reading those labels. You need to understand what it means when it says a certain percentage, or I need 1 cup per gallon. Okay, well, how much? I don't have a cup. All I have is tablespoons. So how many tablespoons is a gallon? Knowing the right amount of product to put into the mix is important as the active ingredient. Or if you're going through and you're running at top speed and trying to apply pesticide to your lawn, it's probably not going to work. You're not going to get enough on there, and it's going to be an ineffective treatment. Some people do apply at the wrong time. For instance, in the middle of summer, sometimes it gets too hot. That will be on the label that will say, do not apply this product. If the temperature is over a certain amount, usually it's about 85 degrees, it'll say don't apply if it's over that temperature. Well, some people don't read the label and they apply when it's over that temperature. Doesn't work. Sometimes it's the wrong environmental conditions. Let's say it's out pouring down rain and you decide that you just desperately need to go apply a liquid-based pesticide. Probably not going to work. So make sure that you have the right environmental conditions. Make sure it's not too windy, it's not too hot, not too cold, not raining, not about to rain, that you're going to have the time frame once the application happens for it to become inert, so that you can get it applied at the right time. And then, of course, pest resistance. If you've been using a certain chemical for too long and you're using the same one and it's the same mode of action, you could very well have a pest-resistant population or resistant pest population, and that will prevent pesticides from working. So all of those are reasons that pesticides may not work or that they may fail. So we just need to look out for that. We need to really get into it with our clients and figure out what they're doing and why they're doing and get them coached in the right direction. Okay, the toxicity of these chemicals is a very important thing to know. Your signal word is going to be the thing that tells you how deadly something is. Most of the stuff that we're going to be able to provide to people is probably going to be in the caution era or maybe no signal word at all. Very, very seldom will we be able to give something to a client that says warning or danger or poison. Most of the time you need to be licensed for those kinds of things, and those are restricted use pesticides for the most part. The general use for the most part are going to get to about caution. You may see some warning ones, but they're going to be a caution generally. Important factor on any chemical, no matter what you're using, is to look at the LD50. The LD50 is the lethal dosage to the test population or the test animal that they tried it on. So if they gave a population of mice, let's say they gave 100 mice this chemical at this rate and it killed 50 of them, that would be your LD50. It's just saying 50% of that test population. Okay, so use classification, I kind of touched on this. General use or unclassified, you're going to not need any kind of license. This is the ones that you can buy at Lowe's, Home Depot, Manning's, Hall's, wherever you go. These are the chemicals that you're going to be able to buy there. They're going to probably be the same chemicals or very similar to the chemicals that the restricted use guys get, but they're going to not be anywhere near the concentration. And so that's the important factor in it. So just know that general use you do not need a license for. Restricted use, on the other hand, they have a higher toxicity. They are going to require licensing. They used to test through us. We don't test them. We don't test people anymore, but we do still provide the training. If you are in an environment or a condition where you need a pesticide license, you can get that through Matt. He can do the training. Just get in touch with him, Matt Lawler. Get in touch with him, see if you can get some training, and then get set up to take the classes. Oh, it's important. It won't let me go back on that slide, but it's important to know on that last slide, you will not be able to buy restricted use chemicals without that license. Chemicals do come in synthetic and organic. Synthetic are your man-made ones. They tend to last a little bit longer. They tend to be designed to persevere in those environments. That's not to say that all chemicals or all pesticides are synthetic. Some of them are organic. Organic just means plant-derived or botanical or mineral or soaps or oils or microbials, one of those kinds of things. Organic just means carbon-based. You will get some debate. You'll hear people say, no, neem oil is the best thing ever, and some people say, no, insecticidal soap is the best thing ever. There's not much out there about what the difference is, so I just figured I'd throw it at you. Neem oil is generally a repellent or something that kind of makes them go away. It's gonna take a lot longer to act, versus insecticidal soap, as long as you have soft-bodied insects, is a contact killer. The second that the insecticidal soap hits that insect, it's going to kill off that insect, or in the case of scale, you're going to kill off the next generation of that insect. Okay, mode of action. All the mode of action is how that chemical reacts to the targeted pest. And so sometimes that's going to affect photosynthesis, sometimes it's going to affect the hormones of the insect, sometimes in the case of insects, most often it's going to affect the central nervous system and kill them that way. Does it go into the plant through the leaves, through the roots? Is there any efficacy in soil? All of those things fall under mode of action. And so it's really just how that chemical interacts with the pest. It will be a color code that's written on the bottle. They just kind of come in different modes and flavors. They are going to be color coded, how they affect the physiology, and numbered for resistance management. The whole reason that they do all of that is to be able to tell you, okay, now you need to switch to this one so that we're not getting the pesticide resistance. It's a resistance management thing more than anything else. Okay, so why is the mode of action important? Well, let's talk about some common misconceptions, and the biggest one being glyphosate, because you'll hear everybody talk about glyphosate. There's a lot of online claims. The biggest ones and the ones that I find funniest are when people talk about the glyphosate that's in my bread. Okay, well, we don't generally use glyphosate in wheat. It's very, very seldom used. So the glyphosate that's in your bread is probably non-existent. But one of the other ones you'll hear is that you'll spray it on an area and you'll never be able to plant there again for 35 years, blah, 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 blah. Those are people that are somewhat uneducated on the topic, but they like to go out online and tell everybody else how to live. There is a little bit of efficacy in the roots for glyphosate, but that's very minimal. Most of the time that glyphosate is going to be absorbed through the foliage and it breaks down very quickly in the soil. So things like glyphosate are an important thing, and it's a widespread used chemical. But it's important to know how it works so that when you talk to clients, you can sort of alleviate some of these fears, because there is a lot of fear, particularly around this chemical out in the world. So it's important that you know how it works, but that's the mode of action, and knowing how that mode of action works and know how that chemical interacts with those plants so that you know how to coach the clients better. Hope all that made sense. Okay, so our number one thing that we're doing with mode of action is we're trying to avoid pesticide resistance. It's important to know that even any pesticide or chemical that you apply to any plant or any animal, is probably not going to kill 100% of that population, which is kind of what you're seeing on the graphic here. So your first generation, we applied it, you see that little red guy lived. Okay, so that red guy, he goes on, he starts making new babies, or she starts making new babies. Now we have a higher percentage of that population that is resistant to that pesticide. So then we apply it again. We do the same mode of action. We do the same chemical. We apply it again. Well, now we have a higher percentage of resistant organisms, so a larger population is going to live on that second application. And the more you do that, the more that population is going to live, because the only ones that are going to survive that are the resistant organisms. So that's why rotating your mode of action is so important, and why pesticide resistance is such a big deal. Okay, here's just a quick example of a mode of action rotation. These two products do the same thing. They kill the same insects. They target the same function even. They both target nerves, but they enter the pest in different ways. And so because they enter the pest in different ways, it's a good swap one for the next between sprays. That way you can avoid some of that resistance. And so when we go back to that last slide, the one that survived the first spray would probably not survive this spray. So that resistant population they created is going to die off from this spray versus the other one versus the first spray. The reason they do that is because it enters the insect through a different methodology, and yes, there will still be some resistance, but it's going to kill off a bigger population in subsequent sprays. So you would want to use maybe this one on the left for 2 sprays and then the one on the right for 2 sprays, and then you'd want to go to a different methodology after that and figure out a different resistance, and then you could probably go back to the first one after about three swaps. Okay, always read the label. There is lots of really good information on the labels. It's very important. You want to read it before purchases. It's going to tell you how to mix it, how to apply it, where to store it. So a lot of times you can put it in your garage, but your garage may get too hot, so you want to make sure that you know how to store it. It's going to tell you how to dispose of the containers once it's finished. There's just a lot of really good information on there. The label is quite literally the law. You may have, and I've even heard of hardware store people around here telling people to apply at a higher rate than they should be applying. We're not going to do that. We stick to the label. I don't know what the liability is for those hardware stores, but we stick to the label application rate. Make sure that you know it. Make sure that you're reading it if somebody brings you a chemical. All right. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but where is it safe to apply these chemicals? Is it something that you can put on vegetables? Is it something that you should avoid putting on vegetables? What's the toxicity level of that? Now, again, we're most likely going to be in the caution range, but maybe this is one of the ones that's a little bit more higher dose, and so you want to make sure that you're being a little bit extra careful with it. It's going to tell you what your personal protective equipment is, what you need. So do you need closed-toe shoes? Do you need long pants? Do you need long-sleeve shirt? Do you need gloves? All that kind of stuff is on there. It's going to give you the mixing instructions. Sometimes you need a surfactant or something to help that chemical stick to the target a little bit better. The label is going to tell you that. It's going to say oil, sometimes it's diesel fuel, sometimes it's a number of things, but it's going to tell you that. How much you need to apply to the pest to make the pest susceptible to it is going to be on there too. That's your application rate. What happens to you if you get it on your skin or in your eyes? What do you need to do? What kind of actions do you need to take? That will be on the label. How long can I wait, or how long do I have to wait after I apply this before I'm able to harvest anything off of there? So let's say I sprayed some tomato plants with some BT, and I sprayed it on there, and I go, okay, and I look at the label and it says, okay, do not harvest this for 14 days after application. Okay, I know if I was coming up on having a whole bunch of ripe tomatoes, then that's probably not the one I want to go with. So I need to know those days to harvest. That's going to be on the label. And then the reentry interval. Reentry interval is going to say, do not allow pets or children or you or anybody to go into this area for a certain amount of time. Most of the time anymore with the pesticides that we're going to be dealing with, it's about a half an hour. But it will be on the label, and you need to read that so that you know you're not going to go traipsing through something that could potentially be harmful, or have your dog or cat run through something that might potentially be harmful. All of that is just stuff you want to avoid. Okay. So pesticide selection, again, make sure that you know what the active ingredient is. The active ingredient is written right here on the label. I don't know if you can see it in those pictures very well, but it's the top section of that label on the bottom left of the container. It says active ingredient right on top. This one is glyphosate, and it is going to tell you, and it's going to tell you what concentration and all that kind of stuff in there. It's going to tell you, you may look at your situation or your client's situation, and they've got a bunch of kids. They're running a daycare out of their house, and so looking at the toxicity and how bad it is for humans, it may be something we say, insecticidal soap over this other one, just because you have so many kids in your house. So the toxicity to human and pets is a big factor when you want to figure out which pesticide you want to use. Ease of use. Is it something that comes right in the package? A lot of ant killers anymore come with a package that's split open on the bottom. You just unzip it and pull it apart, and then you can sprinkle it right on the mound or around the mound or however it tells you to apply it. So ease of use is a big factor in that. And then required equipment. If you're going to need a tractor and a bunch of other stuff that you don't have, then it's not the right product for you. You need to figure out a different product. Okay, mixing and applying. This will be on the label instruction, and we want to pay attention to it. If we wind up underdosing, we can very much so reduce the effectiveness or not knock out that population at all, not suppress that population at all. And in that instance, what are we even doing? We're not solving the client's problem. So we want to make sure that we are not underdosing. So we want to look at the label and make sure we're putting the appropriate dose. On the other side of that, we do not want to overdose. I know my grandpa was one of the worst ones for it. He'd say, well, just double the dose. It'll work twice as well. It doesn't work that way. It's expensive, it's wasteful. These products have been tested so that a certain amount has the effect, the desired effect on the organism. Make sure that you're mixing it appropriately and not overmixing it. Also, biggest thing, it is technically illegal to do that. So we don't want to overdose. When we apply, we want to make sure that we're not applying on a very windy day. You want the wind to be less than 5 miles an hour. We want to do very low pressure spraying because high pressure spraying is going to automatically be creating a little bit of a wind, and so it's going to be pushing that chemical out maybe farther than we expect it to. Low pressure doesn't have that problem. Low pressure would be like the hand sprayers that I use here or backpack sprayers or things of that nature. They're not really high pressure, they're very low pressure. We also want to make sure that we're applying either early morning or late evening. The reason we're doing that is because there are lower temperatures which make that product more effective most of the time. And there's also tends to be lower winds. That doesn't mean that there can be no wind at those times of day. It just means they tend to have lower winds. Another reason to not overdose is we don't want that chemical to leach into the groundwater, or at least as much as possible, we don't want that chemical to leach into the groundwater. Depending on the pore space of your soil, this can happen more easily or less easily, depending on your soil. So understand your soil, make sure that you're mixing and applying at the correct rate so that we don't have these issues. This graph here is just how it happens in sand versus how it happens in clay. That's all that's talking about. The last thing is runoff. If we over apply, then a lot of that, especially if we get rain here, I know it's strange to get rain here, but if we get rain here, we can wash a lot of that off of our yard. Two problems with that. One, makes it ineffective, and two, now we've washed all that into the local waterway, and so now it's poisoning different environments that we didn't mean it to, and now we've become non-point source pollution. So we want to avoid that, so just make sure that you're mixing at the correct rates. Okay, how do we avoid injury to ourselves? Well, we have acute, chronic, and allergic reactions that we can have to these chemicals. Acute is going to be immediate, it's going to be severe. Let's say you spill some of the chemical on your hand and it burns and you have problems with it. That would be an acute reaction. Chronic, that means you've applied these things so many times and gotten it on yourself so many times that you've actually created a chronic problem for yourself. So chronic happens over a long period of time through repeated applications. It's just really bad. Let's try to avoid it. Make sure you're using the right PPE. Make sure that you're applying as little as possible. So let's stop that from happening. And then there are some people that can have allergic reactions. Not everybody reacts to chemicals the same way. Some people don't have any issues with it. Some people have a lot of issues with it. It's just kind of how it works for you. If you have allergies to these, maybe that chemical's not for you. Okay, so dermal exposure is where exposure happens the most, although most chemicals don't penetrate skin very well, not human skin at least, very well. So it's not as big of an issue in your skin. Really, your mouth and your eyes and your nose are where you're going to get the biggest amounts of exposure. So, goggles, masks, read the label and put on the PPE it tells you to. Some other things you might want to do on top of wearing the right stuff. You might want to remove any children's toys or pet dishes before you apply. I know that sounds obvious, but it doesn't always happen. But you don't want anything that they might put in their mouths, and so you want to remove those before you apply anything to that area. Don't drink or smoke or eat during the application. Anything that can get chemical on your hand that you then put your hand to your mouth is bad. So don't drink, smoke, or eat during application. Any clothes that you were wearing, generally speaking, as long as you clean them on a warm cycle or a hot cycle, and you generally want to wash them by themselves. So it's something you're going to throw in your washer, run it on a hot cycle. Then you can either take the clothes out if you want to, and they should be okay at that point, and throw them in the dryer, or you can run it on another cycle that's cold just to wash everything out, make sure everything's thoroughly washed. but you want to make sure that you're laundering the clothes that you were wearing while you were applying that chemical. If you do get exposed, even if you're taking all the precautions, take the product label with you to the hospital. If you do need to go to the hospital, and make sure you're taking the product label, it'll just help the doctors deal with it. Okay, and that is 1222. I know my little video bubble is blocking it. I'll try to move that when I do the processing on this. There are 3 poison control centers in Florida. If you have any questions about what happens if you get exposed or you think you may have been exposed, they are toll-free. They are 24/7. I have called them before, not for pesticide exposure. My kid bit through one of those squishy balls and they weren't sure. It says non-toxic, but we figured better safe than sorry. But they are available. They will answer the phone. They will give you good advice. They are medical staff that are there manning those, so they are very trained in medicine. So that's the number for them if you should happen to need them. Okay, storage and disposal. You're going to want to make sure that you store any of these chemicals in a cool, dry, ventilated place. You don't want them to get real hot. You don't want them to get, particularly in the case of like some of your powders, you don't want it to be in a high moisture area where the powder is going to get all gummy. You don't want that. Make sure you're storing it in the original container and make sure that you are clearly marking the chemical for what it is. Also, make sure that you don't store anything else in those containers after they're empty. For instance, this kid with the Coke bottle, that's a bad idea. That's hopefully nothing any of you would ever do, but that's a bad idea. Don't store your pesticides in a Coke bottle. You do want to apply the full container to the appropriate area. Usually you come and you will triple rinse whatever the container is after you're doing it. That generally goes also for just your applicators. So if you have one of the carry-around tanks and you're spraying with that, what you can do is just triple rinse it after every use. The same thing happens with the container overall, unless it's cardboard. If it's a plastic bottle, then you want to rinse it 3 times, then pour that out into the area that you applied it already. Or if you have a storage disposal area, pour it out there. Shake out any of the excess powder or formulations that you might have on the treated site again. And then again, never use those containers to store other things. After that, even if you take a Sharpie and mark out what it is, just don't use them. Just take them. The landfill in Santa Rosa County is in Baghdad, I think. I think that's Baghdad. That might still be Milton. But as soon as you pull into there, there's an area for chemicals off on the right. If you want to be absolutely 100% sure, you can take the containers there after you've washed them out. Take them there, and they will help you dispose of them properly. Okay, that is all that I have for this. Again, this is the QR code for the test right there, and right there. And I will put that link in the description when I upload this to YouTube. I hope this was informative. I hope I didn't go too fast. If you have questions, you can call me, or I will see you guys all tomorrow for our January meeting. You can ask me there. I'm sure all of you will have watched this and taken the test by then. So we'll just make sure that we watch this, take the test, and then we'll get going on a great Master Gardener year. Thanks for paying attention.